Buckeye Nation, welcome to the Silver Bullets Podcast, the Big Ten East Preview. I'm your host, Shannon Sommers, contributor at Hayes and Cannon on theozone.net, producer for Across the Field with Tony Gerdeman. I'm joined by my colleague here, Chip Minnich, also a contributor at Hayes and Cannon and Athlon Sports. Chip, you're in Kansas. How's Kansas?
It's very sunny. Unfortunately, during the eclipse, for all of the everyone was talking about how wonderful the eclipse was. I saw basically a cloudy sky. So I will have to rely on everyone that saw the eclipse a few days ago for all the wonder that it supposedly was.
Well, 2024, we'll be able to see it in our backyard. So
there you go.
Waiting there. As I stated earlier, this is the Big Ten East preview. We're going to be breaking down the mighty Big Ten East. We have Brett Ciancia. Did I say that right again?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, pick six previews again. We're just going to go ahead and jump right into this because, there's probably a lot to talk about this week compared to last week. You've got at least three teams there now. Most polls are ranked in the top 10 or not close to it. We'll start off with what I think, and we'll see if everybody agrees. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Second year for Chris Ash. They went 2-10 last year. Just announced Kyle Bolin is the transfer quarterback from Louisville is going to be their starter. And Jerry Kill from the Minnesota Golden Gophers former head coach. He's the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Chip, what are you picking Rutgers to finish last too?
Yeah, I have Rutgers last. I think patience is not only a virtue, but it's going to be a necessity for Rutgers. Chris Ash is slowly and methodically rebuilding Rutgers, but it's not easy being in the Big Ten East and making any kind of dramatic headway. Rutgers went 2-10 in 2016, and they might be able to improve by a game or two, but the heavyweights within the division are probably going to batter the Scarlet Knights again in 2017. So I am, Shannon, you referenced Jerry Kill. I am curious about the impact of hiring Jerry Kill as the offensive coordinator. Rutgers is they're going in the right direction, but it's just going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, I agree. They started off with a bare cupboard and trying to rebuild everything. Chris Ash has a hard task in front of him. Brett, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Rutgers and last year in the East. Talk about one of the worst offenses in Power 5 last year. Do like, as you mentioned, bringing in Jerry Kill as the OC. Bolin taking over quarterback, who was the starter before Lamar Jackson unseated him in 2015. But overall, it was weak O-line play. They lacked receivers on the sides. Hopefully, Janarian Grant comes back healthy from injury. And a set of grad transfers are coming in as well to bring some aid on the outsides. The defense wasn't as bad statistically as the offense. But both sides, as Chip mentioned, got smoked against the Big Four in the East. Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State combined to beat them 224-0. So I understand the record being poor in year one, but you got to avoid those blowouts if you want to compete recruiting-wise. So we'll see if they can improve on that. They do get Illinois and Purdue out of the West, the two feeders over there. So I think they might be able to steal a conference win here or there.
I know if any Buckeye fans or any other fans that are listening, if you have a chance to go to Rutgers and enjoy a game, I would do it. It's a pretty nice stadium, nice setup, birthplace of college football. Just want to throw that in there. My next team, I'm going to go with Maryland, who actually has a game against Rutgers at Yankee Stadium on November 4th. But we got Maryland Terrapins, DJ Durkin. You're going to have two of the Urban Meyer tree there facing off against each other. They went 3-9 last year. They're looking to be improving, but speaking of Urban disciples, they're starting off the season against Texas. So they're going to be seeing Herman and Durkin going against each other. Brett, who do you have? Do you have Maryland there?
Yeah, I also go with Maryland 6. They have a little bit better roster talent across the board than Rutgers. A few star players are smattered across the roster, like Jesse Bonham at the end. But they need to really revamp the secondary. One of the worst rushing defenses in America. They actually came in at 127th in the category. So a glaring weakness there. One thing I noticed in year one under Durkin, they they destroyed some weaker teams. When they had that line edge, they were able to establish the run game and really dominate. But there was a sharp contrast between those games against weak teams and then anyone with a pulse. They couldn't do anything offensively. So kind of an up and down season. They got to play up to their opponents a bit more if they want to compete in this division.
Chip, where do you have Maryland?
I have them 6 as well. I think there's a possibility of another lower tier bowl game, but the schedule's not going to do the Terrapins any favor. Shannon, you referenced Maryland's opening up at Texas. They've got games at Ohio State, at Wisconsin. They have Michigan. They're at Michigan State, who they beat last year, but we'll talk about Michigan State later on. And Penn State, they seem losses. So I'm gonna circle the Indiana game on October 28th as being crucial for getting to another bowl game in the second year under DJ Durkin.
Yeah, they're building new facilities, trying to get everything changed around. They want their football team to be like their lacrosse program, but it's going to be a little while to even try to get to that level. For the 5th spot for me,
they are.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, pretty successful in recruiting year one in Durkin. They actually landed a top 15 class, extremely rare, and at University of Maryland, starting to lock down that talent-rich area, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area, D.C. area. So at least encouragement there. But I wonder if, without competing towards the top of this division, if he can sustain that elite recruiting. You know, you got to back it up on the field a bit. So we'll see if he can keep that going on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, hopefully these programs are going in the right direction for their fans. All right, for the 5th team, I'm going to go with the Spartans of Michigan State. Mark D'Antonio. I know we picked them, or I think I picked them like 3rd for, last year, but it seemed like they had a vacuum of leadership. And I know we had interview with Hondo Carpenter, which ended up getting ruined by software glitches, but there was a lot of problems within the program with the leadership and everything, but supposedly they got worked out. A lot of off-season stuff with the sexual assaults and accusations and investigations and suspensions and this and that. I think that they're going to improve on a 3-9 season, but I think Sparty's biggest issue is it's going to be their offense. Their offense, since D'Antonio's been a coach, pretty much has been kind of vanilla. Chip, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to disagree with you. I think I have in number 5, I have Indiana. It seems strange to say this about the Hoosiers, but this is a team that may be defined by their success on defense because of Tom Allen being the head coach. And we all know about how much emphasis that Tom Allen has placed on that opening game against Ohio State. And Shannon, we talked about the concerns that you would think about, if Ohio State comes out and really, takes them behind the woodshed, what kind of psychological effect that could have. But getting back to the defense, there's 9 starters returning on defense. And Tom Allen, I think, is, being a defensive oriented coach, the second year in the program, I think that's going to help Indiana. But similar to Maryland, what we were just talking about them, the schedule's really tough, especially within the middle, starting September 30th. Indiana, they're at Penn State, they've got Michigan, they're at Michigan State, they're at Maryland and Wisconsin. So if you open up against Ohio State with a likely loss, repeating myself here, but the game at Maryland on October 28th may make or break the bowl game chances for Indiana. So slight difference of opinion there. I'm going to go with Indiana in the 5 spot.
Brett, are you going with Michigan State or Indiana?
Yeah,
or
I'm right there with Chip with Indiana 5th. We'll talk about Michigan State next, but for Indiana, first thing right away is the schedule, the cross-division schedule. I kind of had them on the same tier as Maryland. But you look at what Maryland has in the West, they have number 1, 2, and 5 teams, in my opinion, with Wisconsin, Northwestern, at Minnesota. Meanwhile, Indiana gets Illinois and Purdue, and that might just be a sweep right there. That could be 2 wins compared to 0 for Maryland in their cross-division. So maybe a game or 2 up already to start out. As you mentioned, I like Allen as a defensive-minded coach. All the experience back with T. Gray Scales at linebacker. I like the D. Offense has some promise. I think Richard Legault, a lot of pass yards. He's got to cut down the interceptions. One question mark I look forward to is at offensive coordinator. They bring in Mike DeBoer from Tennessee, who Vol fans loved and hated, then loved and hated, the typical treatment down there. But he started out pretty conservative last year. We're opening the offense up. So if we see a more wide open attack like we saw towards the end of Tennessee's last 3 or 4 games there, could be exciting for Indiana. But the little schedule bonus there gives me a game or two advantage, and I'm going Indiana 5th.
That's interesting. I mean, I agree. My biggest thing, the reason why I have Indiana going to be finishing 4th in me is I think they're returning like 98% of their defense, which is huge, especially with Tom Allen moving from the assistant coach to the head coach, still being, in charge of the defense and second year of his defense being there. And I just think, I could be wrong. Normally I'm always wrong, but I think Sparty's got a little bit easier schedule, especially at the end of the season, having to go against Maryland and Rutgers. But I'll let you guys, Brett, I'll let you go ahead and talk about Michigan State then.
Yeah, Michigan State, I have a 4. Talk about one of the disappointments of 2016, especially defensively and especially in the secondary, who I went on a limb and kind of promoted them throughout the offseason heading into last year. Injuries all over the place really doomed them from the start. Tyler O'Connor was shaky at quarterback. They were rotating quarterbacks due to injuries. And then the O-line and the secondary got hit with injuries, and it just spiraled out of control. I think big picture, I think we're seeing the shadow of Pat Narduzzi a bit. One thing you always took for granted was just a top 10 defense by Sparty under those two guys, under D'Antonio and Narduzzi. With him leaving for Pitt, now 2 or 3 years out, I think you're starting to see some of that downfall. All in all, though, when I compare them to Indiana, I think they've recruited on a different tier. They're more in the 20s and 30s every year compared to the 50s and 60s of Indiana. So I think roster talent's there. I do trust D'Antonio enough to give the nudge over Indiana. I like the running back duo of L.J. Scott and Gerald Holmes. And that's a run-first team anyway, so they have to lose a lot of receivers, but they're going to want to pound the ball again. But similar to when we get to Michigan, this is kind of a big youth movement in East Lansing. So looking towards 2018 as a major step forward.
Chip, who do you have? Are you going with Michigan State there?
Yeah, I am going with Michigan State 4th. I think they're easily the most enigmatic team within the Big Ten East, probably the entire conference. Shannon, you referenced the turbulent offseason, both off and on the field. And kind of, what Brett was just referring to, it leads me to thinking Mark D'Antonio is going to go back to what's worked for him in the past. That's having a solid running game led by L.J. Scott, playing tough fundamental defense. The reason why I'm going to go with Michigan State 4th, I think the schedule's there for the Spartans to start stropping up because they open up with games against Bowling Green, Western Michigan, Notre Dame, and Iowa. All of those games are at home. So you win all those, then go on the road to Michigan on October 7th. I think that should be a great game to keep an eye on. It could make for an interesting bounce back here. I really think Michigan State, I think they're going to get back to what worked for Mark D'Antonio in the past. He's going to, I think that, as Shannon, you referenced Hondo Carpenter, I think that there was some attitude adjustment that, some of the players that they had there, I think they kind of have cleaned house, and I'm just looking for a bounce back here from Michigan State. That's why I'm going with them 4th.
All right. Now we're probably going to do some more separation here. I'm not sure exactly how everybody's going to have this fall out, but I am going for a three-peat of the third place team, the Michigan Wolverines. I just feel they have too much. Not so much to replace, but it's just they don't have that depth in case there's an injury for a lot of kids that have a lot of playing time or experience and relying too heavy on a major youth movement of freshmen and sophomores. Chip, who do you have for your third place team?
Yeah, my third place team, it is Michigan, and all of the people that want to accuse me of being a homer and doing this, let me just lay it out for you. I think the key to a good season for Michigan is all dependent upon the development of the new starters they have. It's plain and simple. The offensive line, which struggled throughout last year, they have 3 new starters, and Ohio State fans can certainly remember what happened years ago when Ohio State, back in the national championship year, how that impacted against Virginia Tech. They have 3 new starters. Their wide receivers are completely inexperienced, but I would emphasize, keep an eye and an ear out for Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's a true freshman who is going to probably make a major impact for Michigan this year. The defense lost 10 starters. So there's a lot of talent in the wings, but I just think the development and the chemistry of the new starters is going to make Michigan's year. I think they could surprise with a great year, but I also think is just an equal strong chance they could be mediocre. What I mean by mediocre, 7-5, 8-4. I think that opener versus Florida is going to speak volumes. Keep an eye out for a game on September 16th against Air Force. That's never an easy game. We already referenced when we were talking about Michigan State, the October 7th game, but then they go, at Indiana State. I think that the schedule is a lot more challenging, and the talent is there, but it's unproven. So that's why I'm going to put Michigan at number 3 in the Big Ten East.
Brett?
Yeah, I also have Michigan third. You've hit on a lot of the points here, but I've never seen such an extremely young starting roster, an experienced roster. They're bringing back 4 total starters, just 1 defender, Mike McCray there, middle linebacker. But they have recruited at a great clip. But if you look at the last 5 years, they average around 19th. The last 2 years, they ranked 4th. So the cream of the crop recruits under Harbaugh are true freshmen, redshirt freshmen, or sophomores, extremely young. So they don't really earn the reload status yet. The 2 biggest known factors I have with Michigan actually are the coaches. And for all the crazy hype he does in the offseason, Harbaugh is an excellent coach. He's a quarterback whisperer, if you will, and I think that he'll develop Spade a bit more. But equally as impressive, if not more, is Don Brown over at the defensive coordinator spot. So over at Boston College, he earned, I think it was number 2 or number 1 overall defense 2 years ago, and that was with fringe FBS players. So looking at all the talent he has, all the star power he has, albeit young, I think he can develop a great unit by the end of the year. You touched on the variability, I think, is huge with Michigan. They could impress and go 11-1. They could go 7-5. I think you're going to see a crazier variability week to week where, with all this youth and inexperience, they could come out on fire one week and maybe upset a Penn State or upset an Ohio State. They could even come out and lay a jag against a bottom feeder. So I don't really know what to expect week to week. I do think 2018 they are going to be, and deservingly so, a playoff front runner.
I know when you look at Michigan's schedule, they start off the season against Florida. They won against Florida a couple years ago in the bowl game. Florida's having some issues with the credit card stuff and blah, blah, blah. Are they going to have an offense? That's going to be a tough game for Michigan. It's going to be at the in Texas, so it's away from the outhouse, if you will. Then you have to go to Indiana, who's been pretty much a winning team. Penn State. You got to go to Wisconsin, and you have Ohio State coming. Now, I think Harbaugh's record's like maybe 2-4 against teams that are above 500 away from Michigan Stadium. That's not good. I mean, I don't care where you're at. That's not going to be good. You're going against Penn State after they come off a bye. And last year, Brett, you mentioned that when they had their whiteout game, it's like a 7-point advantage for Penn State. They prove it against Ohio State. I think when they played in 2015 against Michigan, it was like 28-16 or something like that. It was kind of close, not really great close, but that's going to be a tough game for them. They got Ohio State going into Wisconsin. Last year they beat Wisconsin by 7 points in Michigan, and you have more experience on Wisconsin as far as the offense. So it's going to be very interesting. I wouldn't be surprised to see them going 8-4. I don't see them going worse than 8-4, but
those 2 Big Ten road games are definitely red flags for me, like you mentioned. Just such a young team going into the whiteout game at Penn State. I don't trust that at all. I said 7 points. That may even be 10 when they're good. When Penn State's good, it's just an unbelievable force. And the same with Wisconsin too. They're a kind of team where if they get up on you, that crowd gets rowdier and rowdier, and it becomes a huge party up there. I've been to both stadiums twice. I haven't seen a whiteout atmosphere though. I've been to day games at Penn State, so I can't vouch for that live. But the Wisconsin crowd at night was incredible. So I see them losing both of those games straight up. I actually, in our other Triple Option podcast, our Pick Six Previews podcast, I picked Ohio State to make the playoffs. So that's a clear indication I have them beating Michigan in Week 12. So right away, there's 3 losses for Michigan I have penciled in. Florida's a toss-up, as you mentioned there, with some suspensions. And then, like I said earlier, I think they could lay an egg against, a Minnesota, an Indiana on the road, even Sparty. You never know. So it's going to be very variable. I see 3 or 4 losses for Michigan.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk like a lot of Michigan fans are thinking it's going to be. A lot of tough games. This is the season where that adversity comes into play, the experience and that leadership. Who's the leaders that are going to step up in a situation like you were just saying, Wisconsin, when it gets rowdy, you're down. I mean, JT Barrett for Ohio State, he showed bringing him back from 10 points. He kept the Buckeyes into the game with Penn State and that rowdy crowd. You have to have good leadership. And do they have that leadership? That's going to be the biggest key. Speaking of the Penn State and the whiteout, I'm going with the Nittany Lions for my second squad. Second or finishing second. James Franklin, he kind of shocked me last year. They played really well towards they started off a little sluggish, a little hurt, but once they started putting it together, they started making a run. I know a lot of Ohio State fans say that Penn State got lucky against Ohio State. They didn't get lucky. It was a blocked field goal. It happens a lot in college football. There's a lot of things that could have went differently, but Ohio State lost, plain and simple. You have to tip your cap to Penn State. A lot of people are picking Penn State to possibly get into the playoffs. But, Brett, what are your thoughts about Penn State this year?
Yeah, I got them second as well. It's crazy to think about how Penn State started the year and how it finished the year last year. You talk about opening up, losing to Pitt on the road, their rival, in-state rival there, barely beating Temple, another in-state rival, getting beat by 39 points to Michigan, and then barely squeaking out a win over Minnesota on a lucky overtime win. I mean, you're talking about that could have been a 1-3 start, even worse, like 1-4 start. So anyways, from there on, Joe Moorhead took advantage of all the skill players. He opened up the offense. You credit James Franklin for the recruiting success to a degree, but I really credit this entire 2016 season to Joe Moorhead, the offensive coordinator, for airing it out and turning the playmakers loose. I think you're going to see a lot of that similar offense again this year. They relied heavily on the big play. I wonder if that will be sustainable again now that everyone's kind of caught on to what they're trying to do offensively. I do think they'll be pretty sufficient on offense. Defensively, they had some question marks all year. They were banged up all year. In a way, all that extra experience helps. So now you have some depth. But I do think they're a notch below Ohio State, and the home field advantage put me over the top, picking Ohio State as the clear East winner. But a lot of stuff to be proud of over Penn State. But I do one thing I want to throw in here real quick is that I think the next blue blood job that opens up, whether it be in Notre Dame or if Oklahoma decides to go away from Lincoln Riley, I think that Joe Moorhead will be at the top of the list, this offensive coordinator. So keep an eye on him going bigger than just a coordinator job.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised when Penn State lost their defensive coordinator to Tennessee, I think it was last year, or Auburn.
Yeah,
I know he left, and then they promoted him up. And I was actually surprised to see that they actually improved a lot. I mean, it's hats off to what Penn State and everything. I don't want to step on any of Chip's points, so I'll let Chip go ahead and talk about Penn State.
Well, the offense, I definitely have Penn State second. The offense has 10 starters back, and that's why I think the Nittany Lions are going to be in the top 5 all season. Saquon Barkley is the best back in the Big Ten, probably in the entire country. the rest of the offense is potent with Trace McSorley, Mike Gesicki, Deshaun Hamilton, and Saeed Blacknell. Even James Franklin was touting the Penn State offensive line, which is saying something after all these years of Penn State really struggling there.
Yeah.
Penn State has a bye week before Michigan comes to town for their whiteout game on October 21st. I just think October 28th at 3:30 p.m. on Fox, that's going to shape up to be an elimination game in the Big Ten East. I think Penn State, they have other games, at Iowa, at Northwestern, at Michigan State. Yeah, I think they can be challenging. I just think Penn State offensively is going to be that much more difficult to stop. And I agree with Brett. I think that Joe Moorhead is going to be the hot name of the offensive coordinators, for some of the jobs that'll probably open up probably by the end of the season.
My biggest thing with Penn State, you could make an argument that they could be going after the, a repeat of winning the Big Ten again. I think the biggest thing that stands in the way is a hungry Ohio State team that wants revenge, and you play Michigan before you play Ohio State. I mean, those are two brutal games. So each week you have to be up for both of those games, and I think it's going to be really, really difficult. And I think that they're going to take their win against Michigan, and then they're going to take their loss against Ohio State. And I think Ohio State definitely walks away if there's any kind of tiebreaker with it this year. With that being said, we're going to finish it off with our last team of the Big Ten East, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Know a lot of people have been trying to make something out of nothing lately, especially like Paul Feinbaum saying that, should we expect more from Urban Meyer, a coach who's only lost 6 games in 5 years and only has 1 national championship and 1 Big Ten championship, and trying to compare him to Nick Saban, who, he had 2 national championships and 1 SEC championship his first 5 years. I just think with the depth that Ohio State has, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of teams. But I don't want to step on your guys' toes, so I'll let Chip go ahead and start it off with Ohio State.
Well, I have Ohio State. Yeah, I have Ohio State number 1. Even with the wide receiver issues, the inexperienced secondary, some inconsistent offensive line play, Ohio State's the natural favorite. My optimism is entirely about the hiring of Kevin Wilson. It has me expecting an offense that's going to keep the opposition dazed and confused, in terms of how do we attack this? How do we shut them down? For years, Kevin Wilson was able to threaten all Big Ten teams, not just Ohio State, with diverse play calling, underrated talent. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm kind of dipping into my old man, memories here, but I don't remember Ohio State ever hiring such a well-recognized name as the offensive coordinator as Kevin Wilson, because I'm thinking back over 20 years ago, when John Cooper hired Walt Harris to be the quarterback coach in 1995, Walt Harris was not nearly as big a name as he became throughout his tenure at Ohio State. Everyone that remembers the Jim Trussell years will have to admit Jim Trussell was basically his own offensive coordinator. Even Urban Meyer, when he hired Tom Herman was not yet a well-known commodity. Kevin Wilson is well-respected, well-known throughout college football, and he's the main reason why I'm so bullish on Ohio State this season. I mean, the arsenal of highly ranked, highly recruited players in Columbus is that much superior to anything that Kevin Wilson has ever worked with at Indiana. The schedule has its challenges, but they're well spaced out. Or the Penn State game is going to be crucial for the Buckeyes to be well rested, well prepared for that big game on October 28th.
Brett?
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're the same way that every year we just pencil in Alabama as an established playoff team. We can start to do the same with Ohio State. Although Alabama's won the recruiting title for 8 straight years, Ohio State's averaged second over that same span. It's just a clear 1A, 1B, and you can even flip them some years. So I think Ohio State's definitely a safe pick for not only the division, but for a playoff spot. Huge improvement there, offensive coordinator. In fact, I was actually thinking the other day, if Tom Herman had remained in 2015, I think that team goes back-to-back national titles. But with Warner and Tim Beck out, I think that's actually a addition by subtraction and a huge addition with Kevin Wilson, who, when he had elite talent down in Oklahoma, 2008, it was one of the best offenses in college football history with Sam Bradford and DeMarco Murray. So we'll bring the power-heavy version of the spread. That's exciting, especially with the personnel you guys have this year. I mean, and it's crazy to think, too. It looks like last year was almost a down year in the eyes of some Buckeyes fans. But look at how high the bar has been set for that to be a down year, where you lose an NFL record draft class, and what do you come out and do? You still make the playoff, back-to-back years. So I think that the bar's been set so high that anything less than a playoff bid is a disappointment. So I think that, they're the team to do it, though. I think the bye week before Penn State is crucial, as we touched on, while they go and rough it up with Michigan in a whiteout scenario. So I think that Ohio State's going to win the deciding game over Penn State and clinch the spot.
Yeah, I think this year for Ohio State is pretty much a national championship or bust. You're looking at your Kevin Wilson and Greg Schiano. This is the only year you're going to have this great of a coaching staff with Urban Meyer. I think Schiano's going to be gone after this season. A lot of people think so. Rumor is that he turned down a big job last year, mostly in order to stay here for his kids to finish off high school. So I don't see him for a second year in a row turning it down. The defense that Ohio State has, you've got the wrinkle of what they're talking about in the spring of a possible jack package to where you're going to have 4 defensive ends with Lewis as your defensive tackle, who they say is like a defensive end, but he, in a 3-point stance. And you got Hubbard, who used to be a safety, and you got Holmes that they can go out in coverage or they can, rush on the quarterback, and it's going to confuse a lot of offenses. Like we were talking about having Kevin Wilson, who is going to make the defenses react to Ohio State's offense, whereas the last 2 years it's been Ohio State's offense reacting to whatever the defense gave to them. So I think just having a more aggressive team and the personnel to do it's going to be key.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you really want to nitpick it, I know he's won 60 games, but if you want to look at those 6 few losses, it's almost that Meyer and his offensive coordinators have beaten themselves, where they start to abandon certain parts of the offense. I remember the one game Ezekiel Elliott was complaining about not getting touches. I mean, you should never have Zeke Elliott not being fed the ball, in a position to complain about carries. That game was handed away. I believe that was the
Michigan State game.
Michigan State in the rain.
Chip was there. It's his fault.
And then, so you see him start to abandon certain parts of the offense and give JT Barrett way too much wear and tear, 20-plus carry games. So I think that Kevin Wilson will help get out of that rut where you start to beat yourself a little bit mentally. I think that he's going to take it to a new level and, like you said, not shy away from certain defenses.
Another goal that they've been talking about is they want to have 250 yards on off, or 250 yards on the ground and 250 yards in the air. And the Michigan State game in 2014 is a perfect example of the perfect offense for Urban Meyer that we've seen. And I think Kevin Wilson is going to be coming close to that each and every week, which is going to be pretty exciting. Chip, you have anything else?
Just to add, something that Brett mentioned about Joe Moorhead being the hot assistant coach, that will be linked with a lot of high priority jobs. You referenced Greg Schiano. I can't imagine Greg Schiano not being in that same category when you think about what he did at Rutgers and basically building that program from the ground up and making them competitive. And you see the work that he's doing with Ohio State's defense, especially in the secondary. I just think he's going to be kind of the defensive, hotshot name that, will be the complement to the offensive hotshot name, which is Joe Moorhead. So I think Ohio State fans better relish having Greg Schiano on the staff. Kevin Wilson will probably be here at least another year, but it wouldn't surprise me if he gets another head coaching opportunity as well.
Yeah. All right. We all have Ohio State and Wisconsin meeting up in the Big Ten championship game. Chip, who is your winner in this game?
I'm going to go with Ohio State. I think Ohio State. I think Wisconsin's going to give Ohio State all that they can handle in the Big Ten championship, but I think that'll be a game for the ages. And I just think Ohio State offensively will have too much for Wisconsin to be able to keep pace. So I'm going to go with Ohio State in the Big Ten championship and making a return to the playoffs.
Brett?
Yeah, I think Ohio State. Going to see a 59-0 again, that's for sure. But I do think it'll be competitive. I think the difference being that Ohio State's going to have so much more on the line. They're going to have the playoff bid on the line. And it's crazy to think that they've only have one conference title under Urban Meyer. So I think that they're thirsty for that again, and they're just going to overpower Wisconsin in all facets of the game.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see them doing a 59-0 game, but that was kind of crazy. I mean, of course, we didn't see 59-0 coming when they had Heisman candidate and all that with their offense the last time they met. Brett, who do you have for, obviously with that, we got Ohio State going into the playoffs, but who are your other other three teams for the playoffs then?
So we went Alabama as, like I said before, kind of just a lock every year. It's a really safe bet. Alabama, Ohio State too. We went with Florida State over Clemson in the ACC Atlantic. Clemson, though, keep an eye on them. Everyone's just writing them off. I mean, obviously they lose a lot of firepower in Deshaun Watson, but their core of their team is still there. The lines are very strong. So Clemson will still compete, and wouldn't surprise me if they're still in the discussion. We have Florida State coming out of there, the ACC, for the third spot. We have Ohio State beating Oklahoma in week 2. And just the way that round robin sets up, and with Stoops' departure and addition of a title game in the Big 12, we don't see a team surviving there with less than 2 losses. So the Big 12 we kind of wrote off. So for the 4th spot, we went down to the Pac-12. It comes down to Washington and USC, and we're going with Washington. A little bit wary of the infamous bowl bump, where USC is getting this incredible offseason hype after beating Penn State in a game that arguably should have been won by Penn State. So I think a little bit too much hype at USC. They lose a lot too. And I think that I trust Peterson more than Helton right now. So we're going Washington at 4.
What about you, Mr. Minnich?
I like the logic of what Brett was just saying. I think Alabama, you have to say what you will, like, love, or loathe Alabama. I mean, Nick Saban, you just have to go with the results. I think Alabama's a natural. Ohio State's definitely up there. I agree with the whole Florida State over Clemson. I think Clemson's strength along the defensive line is going to keep them in contention, but I think Florida State, especially with DeAndre Francois at quarterback, I think that's going to make the difference when Florida State and Clemson go head-to-head in the ACC. I agree with the logic in the Big 12. I think Oklahoma State is going to make it interesting, but I think that, as Brett said, that the whole round-robin approach, I can't see anyone coming out of the Big 12. I think the only difference is I'm going to go with USC in that 4th spot, just because I'm a big believer in Sam Darnold. I think that USC, I think they're going to ride. I remember that we said this, that Brett was talking about that whole infamous bowl bump, but I'm going to divert from Brett, and I'm going to actually say that they're going to ride the enthusiasm of that bowl win over Penn State, and that's going to be enough to get them to that 4th spot.
Myself, I'm going to go with Ohio State making Alabama and Washington like you guys. But I think the way the ACC set up, and it's the best conference in the nation, that it's going to actually hurt them. Virginia Tech, Florida State, Clemson, Louisville, you're going to have these guys beating up on each other. I see Penn State losing one game to Ohio State, and that's going to allow them to sneak in and get into the playoffs. I think we might see a 2-team Big Ten playoff. I don't know.
It's definitely possible. I'm worried a little bit about the Florida State pick because of their schedule. Right away, they open with Alabama. So I think that could be a loss right away in week 1. They also end with Florida, who should be in the top 15 area. They have to go to Clemson and then probably play Miami in the title game. So definitely it could be a 2-loss scenario over there, even worse. So I like the logic there, the whole cannibalism idea with the ACC. Yeah, man, the SEC, the Southerners would really lose their minds if 2 Big Ten made it.
Oh, especially, I mean, what are the chances? All right, say Florida State beats Alabama. Alabama takes a loss in the regular season, and they have 2 losses. And for some reason, something happens. I don't know, maybe they get a 3rd loss in the SEC game, or their 2nd losses in the SEC game, and you've got a Penn State or, hey, even a Michigan sitting there with 1 loss. I mean, who do you put in?
Yeah, I think the key is if
I think it goes to head-to-head.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, in your one scenario, if Alabama loses their title game, I can't see them after a title game loss as their 2nd loss getting still a playoff. If they lose to Florida State, maybe lose mid-season, and if by the end of the year are rolling on all cylinders, then I think you have a 11-2 Bama versus 11-1 Penn State. I know it doesn't work like this, but you can imagine Penn State being the odd man out again. It'd be brutal. So I don't know. And the other thing to keep in mind is all these top 10 and top 11 teams are all playing each other. I don't remember seasons where it's like this, where the non-conference games are all elite matchups, interconference, and then title games. So we're going to see a lot of losses at the top, and it's fitting that it's 10 years ago that it was 2007, a wild year in college football where no one wanted to hold on to the number 1 or number 2 spots. Every week there was new teams. You had teams like Cal, Boston College, Kansas, South Florida, who else? Missouri, all in the top 2. So it's almost like we're due for another one of those.
Yeah, we don't talk about the 2006, 2007 seasons in Columbus.
Well, you can talk about the App State-Michigan game a little bit, though. We do like talking about that, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, my favorite out of any of them is Michigan losing to Rutgers at Rutgers. The first year Rutgers came into the Big Ten. That's an all-time classic for me.
Wow.
But yeah, there's a lot of scenarios that can play out. I think a lot of the scheduling that was done 5-10 years ago is really coming into play. You know, a lot of teams are sitting there, or a lot of fans are sitting there saying X school has a cupcake schedule and this blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. I mean, we're not, if you look at the Big Ten, look at Ohio State, they don't have any FCS teams. They don't have any weak teams before they play the rivalry games. I mean, heck, the last couple of years has been Michigan State before Michigan. So it's been, you know, really rough in that regards. So, I mean, the Big Ten, better coaching, better players. It's on the rise. I think the ACC is a great conference. The SEC is good, but I don't think they have that greatness anymore. I think they lost too much of their coaching. They've lost a lot of their luster. There's a lot of, you know, turnover and everything. So I see the SEC, I mean, except for it's Alabama. And the Pac-12, it's feast or famine and everybody beating each other. And the Big 12 just probably needs to fold and put Ohio or Oklahoma and Texas in the Big Ten. Just my thought on that. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Big Ten West preview here on Silver Bullets Podcast. Brett, you want to go ahead and let folks know where they can find you at and your podcast and everything?
Yeah, sure. So you can find us on Twitter at Pick Six Previews. That's all spelled out, Pick Six Previews. We have a podcast called the Triple Option Podcast where we have weekly picks. We actually just recorded last night our season preview where we break down the Power 5 conferences and throw in some stuff there. That'll be live in a couple of days. As we mentioned on the web show, our website, Pick Six Previews, is the most accurate BCS Power 5 preview in America since we launched in 2012, beating all the newsstands, newspapers, magazines, and online publications. So it's been a pleasure coming on 2 years in a row now to the Silver Bullets Podcast with you guys. I appreciate having me back again, and looking forward to some good ball in the best conference in the country. Definitely.
We'll be hopefully talking later on in the season and stuff, but, you know, thank you for coming on. Mr. Chip Minnich, I'll let you let the folks know.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, for coming on. We really appreciate it and really encourage all of our listeners to check out the fine work that you and your colleagues do there. So my Twitter handle is at Chip Minnich, Minnich. Please look for not only the work that I've been contributing to on the ozone.net, but also on Athlon Sports. And I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon.
You can find me on Twitter at ShannonCFB. You can follow our show on Twitter at SILVR Bullets Pod. You could like us on Facebook. We have our Silver Bullets podcast page. You can we're on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, and hopefully soon we're going to be submitting for iHeartRadio and see how that all goes. We appreciate everybody giving all the feedback and how they enjoy the show and everything, and just keep that coming and let your friends and family know. And if you can, in iTunes, leave a review and rating, that'd be greatly appreciated. All right, for Chip Minnich, and I'm Shannon Sommers, and go Bucks.
Go Bucks.